If you haven't heard of the Telepathy Tapes by now, I don't know what you're doing with your life, because this podcast blew up over Christmas. It's called the Telepathy Tapes, right? And the person behind it, her name is Dickens. She recently was featured on Joe Rogan, and they talked about this, phenomenon essentially that blew up because of her podcast. And we'll get into what it is if you haven't heard of it. But in this video, we're going to focus on another part of the interview that most people aren't going to cover. And it's a conversation that happens at the end of this podcast with Joe Rogan, because it covers the UAP topic. And I found it very interesting, their conversation, their back and forth about it. But just in case you're not familiar with the Telepathy Tapes, let's cover it just a little bit.
Really loved your series, the Telepathy Tapes. I had long suspected that there was some sort of a way to prove that there's something going on. There's no way that would be a thing for so long, that people would talk about certain moments where people could read people's minds, or certain moments where there was something that was being exchanged that wasn't verbal, it wasn't facial expressions, it wasn't body language, there was something going on.
Yeah.
And the Telepathy Tapes, essentially proved it.
So in a gist, the Telepathy Tapes is basically a podcast about, autistic children who can read minds, and amongst other things, right? It goes further than that in the show, but that's just elevator pitch, right? Dickens here will basically describe it more as spiritual gifts.
Okay, so what the podcast is about are non-speaking individuals who tend to have apraxia, which is a mind-body disconnect. And those individuals cannot speak with, using their voice. Speaking is a fine motor skill, whereas pointing to letters is a gross motor skill. So spelling to communicate is how many of these individuals communicate, right? And when the first... And with that in mind, I just want to say one quick thing, that often people historically have looked at people with apraxia or non-speakers, and they think that because they can't speak, they can't think, that they're not in there. They don't presume competence, and none of that is true. These individuals have a hard time controlling their body, right? And so if you can't control your body, people make all sorts of assumptions, and that's been really difficult. And so I think that the subjects in this project who are non-speakers with autism have been up against all sorts of different battles, from people not presuming they're competent, from people doubting their way of communication through spelling to communicate. And then, of course, it comes out in many cases that these individuals can read minds, have a plethora of other, for lack of better words, spiritual gifts. And then the parents and teachers often aren't believed about that either. So it's like there's stigma every which way.
And look, like I said, this podcast, the Telepathy Tapes, is very popular, and if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend listening to it. It was phenomenal. Whether you believe in it or not, it's just well put together and well produced. Many people are thinking this proves it. This proves that telepathy is real, and amongst other gifts, and it's a ride. So I highly recommend checking it out. And again, in this video, I want to talk about something else that's brought up near the end, because I often wondered why it kept being brought up, the Telepathy Tapes in the UFO community, right? It had nothing to do with non-human intelligence, right? But the more I, thought about it, it was like, oh, okay, I get it why it's being pushed in the UFO community now, because it's all about consciousness and the connection of consciousness and sort of remote viewing and astral projection, these other ideas, right? These other things these kids described, and some of them adults, right, that had these abilities, right? Because now psionics, is a big term right now in the UFO community, right? And you have all these people with these abilities, and it's boom, they're just connecting them essentially, right, together. In fact, one of the doctors that helped with the Telepathy Tapes is part of the Skywatcher team, right, from UFO whistleblower Jake Barber and his team, right? So they're kind of connected, right? And there may have even been, I suspect, a little bit of planning to release all of this at the same time, because the telepathy tapes come out, then Skywatcher comes out, right? It seemed very planned. I'm not saying that's the case. Kai seems very independent and kind of doing her own thing, so I don't know if there was anything there with that, but it's just interesting, the timing of it, for sure. And I often wonder when it came out, why does everyone keep bringing up the telepathy tapes? What does this have to do with UFOs, right? I mean, it's getting pushed by all the big names in the community, and now I know why. Because of their connection to at least a doctor that's in it, to Skywatcher, right? So again, that doesn't mean anything bad. I'm just connecting the dots here. And you know, this idea behind the telepathy tapes, again, such a great podcast. Their goal was to basically raise enough money through this podcast to do a documentary and do some of these experiments that they did in more unofficial ways, I would say, and do it more in labs and get scientists involved and make it, a feature documentary about it. And it looks like that is what is going to happen, which is awesome. I'm all for it. Let's look into this. We don't know the power of our minds. I get it. So I'm in. But again, let's get to this last part of the interview with Joe Rogan, where they bring up UAP and how it connects. And the way Joe Rogan starts to bring it up to Kai at the end is kind of interesting. I think, if I'm being honest, it catches Kai off guard.
They get shared, like
Right.
your show got shared to me. I don't even remember who shared it to me, because so many people did.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember who the first person was.
Well, and I think that's a thing that is cool, right? We actually have like evidence of what this like democratization of information looks like. Like the UAP phenomena has become so much more mainstream. People are talking about it, like things that could not have been shared or spoken are now out there. Same with psychedelics and psilocybin and, going on ketamine trips or whatever. Like all that now is just common knowledge that this can be great for healing PTSD or, depression or whatever. The stuff with telepathy, I mean, channeling, whatever it is, like all these things, especially TikTok, you're like, holy cow, this is so.
I'm glad you brought the UAP thing up. I hate to interrupt you, but because I think a lot of what we're hearing is nonsense.
Yeah, I mean,
I think a lot of what is being shared, especially publicly, like there's too many voices that I think are either intelligence assets or are disinformation experts that are doing it on purpose. And that there's too much of, the same feeling that I get, like when I said I met my friend's ex-girlfriend, I was like, oh, get out now.
Yeah.
I have that feeling about the UAP thing. When I hear people talking, nothing seems real to me.
Yeah.
When I talk to people about it, there's not one. I mean, even when people tell me their own personal experiences, I believe them. It does not register as real.
That's so interesting.
Something registers as being nonsense. There's something, maybe not nonsense, but maybe way weirder than what they're explaining it like non-physical interaction that they are reinterpreting as like physical interaction.
Yeah.
That there's some disconnect between their work. Like if someone tells me an experience that they had, like here's a good example. My friend Steve told me a harrowing experience of them being attacked by a brown bear in Alaska. Oof. And when he tells you this story, first of all, I know it's real because I know multiple people who were there. They were all there. No one got hurt. It was very fortunate, but they got charged by a grizzly who ran through their tent. One of my friends was on its back.
Oh my gosh.
For like
scary.
10 yards.
Oh,
like it literally plowed through the people, and he wound up like riding its back for like 10 yards before he fell off.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just like, I mean, it can cover 10 yards in a second, right? And the whole thing was just insane chaos, and the way he describes how your reptilian brain completely takes over. The fear is so overwhelming and different than anything you've ever experienced before. I know it happened.
Yeah.
When he's telling me this, I know it happened.
Yeah.
When these people are telling me about talking to aliens and all that, I'm not getting nothing out of them. I'm not getting nothing. I'm getting a flat piece of paper.
Yeah, there's no fear. There's no charge.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I just don't get anything from their story.
So
I hear it. It's
interesting.
interesting. But I don't get anything that lights any bells.
Yeah.
There's no bulbs go off with me. I just sit there and go, wow. Okay, so what were you thinking? And I'm asking them questions, but I'm not getting nothing.
So I have to be honest. I think that caught Kai off guard a little bit. But, honestly, I think she can relate a little bit to it, right? There's so much out there in, the UFO field and hearing all these stories. And I have to admit, I totally relate to what Joe's saying. I get the same sensations, right? It's like nothing sparks off as real about people telling me their experiences for the most part, right? It's like I believe what they're saying to me, but nothing is sparking off like a real story, something that actually happened from somebody. I can tell when somebody's telling me a story they went through or something happened to them or whatever, I don't know. I do get the same feeling. But at the same time, you don't know, right? It's just my intuition. But I totally understand where Joe is coming from here. But at the same time, there's more to the story, right? This is a nuanced opinion, as Joe's about to explain here.
Yeah, that's
and
interesting.
so that leaves me, because I know that for sure the government has technology that they do not want the general public to be aware of for reasons of national security or whatever it is. Or, money has been pushed through to finance things and they lie to Congress and they have to keep lying. Whatever the reason is, that's real. There's most certainly black ops programs that the general public is not aware of. That's always going to be the case. If you have those, what better way to hide them than in plain sight and with a bunch of people that are air quote whistleblowers that go out and tell everybody about all these experiences. They're not of this earth. And that's what I would do.
Yeah.
If I was the government and I wanted to be super sneaky, I would have a bunch of my really clever agents go and whistleblow. Tell some stories. Talk about people that have been abducted. Talk about all these different things.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there's real experiences. So I think there is something, because it exists throughout history, just like telepathy exists throughout history and ghosts exist throughout history and religion exists. There's something there.
Yeah.
There's something there that's distorted by our very slippery grasp on truth.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a very true assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the point I would have brought up, too, if Joe hadn't brought it up there at the end, which is there's a long history of all this phenomena as well, right? So, two things can be true at once. All these whistleblowers coming out, and blowing the whistle about UFOs and the cover-up and this and that could very well be lying, but that doesn't mean the phenomena isn't real, right? Clearly, something has been going on for centuries, right? Millennia, who knows how long, across the globe, different cultures, races, ethnicities, everything. Something is definitely going on that we don't know about, right? And you have so many people with so many different personal experiences that have nothing to do with the government, right? Or being an agent or blowing the whistle on anything. They're just telling you their story, right? So I definitely think something is going on, but I'm also think that there's a lot of BS in the community, more BS than real, right? And that's hard then to try to decipher, right? But I don't know. And this is the issue when you don't have foolproof evidence or whatever, right? Like something like a craft that's, in a museum somewhere that people could go visit, right? Where that is gone, that line in the sand has already been passed, right? We already are aware that we're not alone and been visited, right? But that is still up in the air. Now, some people say, Patrick, what are you talking about? It's so obvious. I mean, if you're not there yet, then I don't want, well, then do what you want, right? Like, that's where a lot of people are at, unfortunately, right? A lot of people think we're not alone, but not everyone thinks we've been visited. Those are two different concepts, and the number drops dramatically when you get to have we been visited, right? The number of people who believe in that. But I definitely think something could have happened. Like, it's not crazy to think that. That seems plausible to me, that we've been visited and didn't even know, or they have left a craft or something. I mean, that's not that crazy to think about. But again, the idea becomes all these people jumping on that bandwagon, on that train. How do you decipher from them, right? What's real and what's not?
There's also just too many stories from hundreds of years ago that are incredibly similar to the things that people are talking about today.
Yeah, that's the stuff that's interesting to me, like Jacques Vallée. And
exactly.
Yeah.
I just finished his third book.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the mind. But he's great because he's not a believer. Yeah. He's very skeptical about a lot and highlights a lot of the bullshit to the point where you're like, okay, what's true?
Yeah.
What
I mean, those
true?
are the people you have to trust, though. I think.
The only ones. The only ones you can trust.
Yeah.
Because there's too many people that are out there telling you, I know what's happening. We're about to experience a contact. All of the people, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have been notified. And like those people I don't want to talk to. Like you shut the fuck up. You don't know anything. There's no way you know.
Right.
You're just taking advantage of this very weird moment in time where people aren't sure. But there's all this discussion of this phenomena, and you've grifted yourself to
right,
this.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of those people out there.
And it's clickbait, and it's this and their profit,
because they're gross.
No, but the true intellectual people is looking at the consciousness side of this. I think are fascinating. That's what's going on here.
I think that's where it is.
Yeah, it's a conscious. I mean, that's why. I wasn't into the UAP stuff until people started saying to me, like, you should at least start looking at some of these great thinkers because a lot of this has to do with consciousness and what are we and why are we here and like what's a hyper object, right? Like a lot of stuff that I'm like, what is going on? So you start reading about it and understanding, okay, like where things might converge is an exploration of consciousness.
All right, I'm in. I can see some of that, right? Because I understand we don't understand the limits of our consciousness, where it comes from, why it's there, how it even works exactly, what are the limits. And, hidden things of our consciousness, like we just don't even know. So I agree that studying that and looking into it and I'm all in. So well said, Kai. I found this to be a very fascinating interview, actually, on Joe Rogan. He's been killing it, in my opinion, with interviews lately that I've really enjoyed. So check this out. I'll put a link in the description. Go check out that interview with Kai Dickens on the Joe Rogan Experience. Hope you enjoyed today's video, vetters. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.